just 1 second. All right, sorry for the hold up there. We did want to record today's presentation, and I had forgotten to do that, so we're just giving the system a minute to start the recording, and then we're going to proceed on just in case anyone is looking for the recording after the fact. All right, so it looks like we're good to go. We're now recording. In the unit source prompt on the general tab, we can identify where the unit originates from, and that's going to default in from the scan data if you are scanning. Here we're in manual entry, so I'm going to manually enter ARC, which stands for American Red Cross, which we'll see later when we're in the source and destination dictionary. And then we're going to identify our product. So what product are we ordering? I had entered a product order on my patient for a red blood cell. So I'm going to enter a red blood cell into inventory. And that also gives you a lookup to the product dictionary. In the received date and time fields, the date and time the unit was received in the blood bank should be entered. Today and now defaults, but it can be edited. In the volume prompt, volume will default in from the product dictionary's usual volume field, which is on page 1. However, this can be edited within this routine, and the corresponding unit of measure will default in from page 5 of the blood bank product dictionary via the unit of measure prompt. In the workload prompt, you can enter the workload function associated to entering units into inventory. This is typically for our Canadian sites, and it helps them keep statistics which allow users to see the output of units and can help project or make projections for next year. This prompt can also default from the product dictionary on page 4 for the default unit workload prompt. In the source blood type prompt, I'm going to enter O negative. This is how the source, American Red Cross in this case, identifies this blood type. Units from the American Red Cross will have a blood type labeled on the package of blood, unless it's considered UNK or unknown. The source blood type should default from scan data. However, if you have not enabled scanning to edit or manually enter the source blood type, you can perform a lookup or free text and select the desired blood type. And that is going to be a lookup to the BBK blood type dictionary. In our blood type prompt, you should enter the blood type that should file to the BBK history for this unit. The blood type may default, as it did in this case, to the source blood type or UNK based on the default blood type prompt defined in the BBK product dictionary on page 5. The source blood type and blood type prompts must match unless you're using UNK. For products requiring blood type, the typing required prompt on page 2 of the blood bank product dictionary would be set to Y. A unit cannot be cross-matched or issued unless there is a verified blood type on the unit. In the BBK unit number prompt, you would identify a number within your hospital's inventory, and the unit number should match what is labeled on your unit. This would default in if the unit was scanned. However, the system will auto-generate numbers using the Meditech BBK specimen numbering wheel when you enter a period, as I had done. If there is a valid prefix defined in the LAS system parameters on page 1, which we still have open, so I will launch into. So right here, I have my unit number prefixes defined. And then in our lot number prompt, which is grayed out, if the product being entered requires a lot number, users can scan or manually enter the lot number in this prompt. This field is inaccessible unless the all units alike prompt is set to N and the lot number required prompt is set to Y in the BBK product dictionary. Lot numbers are used for recalling and identification purposes. A lot number is essentially an identification number assigned to a particular material from a manufacturer, and in this case, we are uniquely identifying a batch of blood bags. In the collection date and time prompt, we would enter the collection date and time for this unit. These fields are not required, though the information can be extrapolated from the expiration date and shelf life of the product. To extrapolate, the calculate collection date and time prompt in the product dictionary on page 4 must be set to Y. And note, as you saw, the collection time cannot be greater than the receipt time. In the expiration date prompt, if you're utilizing scanning, the expiration date and time of the unit should default from the scan data. Otherwise, you can edit or manually edit the data to define how long the unit is good for until it expires. And the system will validate the expiration date based on the max shelf life days hours prompt on page 1 of the blood bank product dictionary. Expiration dates beyond the max shelf life cannot be entered. In the inspection prompt, this is a yes or no prompt. You'd enter Y to indicate that the unit has passed a visual inspection and can be entered into inventory for use. You'd enter N if the unit did not pass visual inspection. If N is entered, you would enter the required comments indicating why the unit did not pass inspection. All inspection data is stored on the unit's audit trail, and a unit that fails inspection can be processed up to the point of issue. Making the unit unavailable for use must be done manually using the change status routine. And the require visual inspection field on page 1 of the product dictionary determines if this is a required prompt. So we're going to indicate why. In the segment number prompt, you would enter the number of the segment used for this unit specimen, if applicable. In the unit location prompt, location should default from the lab site dictionary, and you can identify where the product will be stored. This is used to manage inventory and unit searches. However, the response is not required, and that gives you a lookup to the blood bank unit location dictionary. In the card printer prompt, you can identify a printer where the BBK inventory card will print to. Inventory cards print out information, blood type, unit number, etc., about units of products entered into inventory. This format must be defined in the BBK product dictionary on page 3 via the inventory card program field for this product. Users can perform a lookup to display a list of defined printers that pull in from the universe. And then if users would like to capture any additional details during unit entry, they can do so via order screens. There's no order screen associated to this particular prompt, but if you would like to capture additional information at the product level and pull any queries associated to a screen in, you can associate a unit screen on page 4 of the BBK product dictionary. So we'll go ahead and save. And we're provided with the requisition number associated to this unit, as well as the specimen number and the unit number. So I'm going to close. After a unit is entered into inventory, it's possible to have an order group of tests automatically ordered when entering a unit into inventory. The order group must be of the type initial within the order group dictionary. So this can actually be accomplished on page 5 of the blood bank product dictionary via the associated unit order group fields, and it's broken out by affiliated source such as a donor room and non-affiliated source such as this example, which is a unit of blood that came in from the American Red Cross. In my example here, RC, or red blood cells, have the retype order group associated to the non-affiliated source prompt on page 5 of the product dictionary, which you'll see later in the presentation. And that order group is going to be associated to the blood bank test U retype. And since we have selected the BBK enter unit with result entry routine off the BBK unit desktop, the system is branching us into result entry to perform the unit retype per what's been defined for this product. So I'm going to select yes. And here we are now in enter edit results to perform the U retype per our unit of blood. So essentially what you're doing here is you're making sure what the blood type labeled on the bag that the blood type labeled on the bag is correctly marked by completing the unit retype associated to our product order. The components of the U retype profile mnemonic will file in from page 5 of the blood bank test dictionary. So we're going to quickly switch over there just so I can show you some of the hard-coded functionality. So we're going to go into the blood bank test dictionary. Pathway is going to be ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, BBK, test, and enter edit. And we're going to pull in U retype and scroll to page 5. Here it's just important to note that we can see the B-type test falls at the bottom of the list of components, and it also has the highest print number. This blood type test is associated with the BB calculation of unit, which we can see if we pull in our unit blood type test. So we'll go back, enter UBT, and then if I inactivate this test, I'll get a dictionary cross-reference. And here we can see that this particular test is associated to the calculation of unit. So I'm going to pull in the blood bank calculation dictionary very quickly. Pathway is going to be ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, blood bank calculation, enter edit. And I'm going to pull in that calculation. So the calculation is of the type blood type, and it invokes the blood bank truth tables associated on the blood type interpretation tab here. These are essentially, the calculation is going to fire based on the results of the component test that will trigger our calculated blood type, as we're going to see when I result the retype. So exit out of there, go back, and I'm going to pull this back up. So we're going to result the components of the profile test, and we see once we've resulted those components, our blood type triggers into the blood type test prompt. And again, that's a result of our unit calculation. So I'm going to final verify the blood type, and we'll see that doing this moves the status of this unit from received to resulted. I'm going to click save. We'll verify all the results. All right, so this time the unit will be at an available status and can be cross-matched to our patient. If anyone is curious, KB 38765 details all the possible blood bank product statuses. So we're going to go back into the specimen desktop, which I had opened previously, and we're going to go to enter results. And I'm going to identify my patient specimen that was associated to our test patient, Jennifer Brooke. I'm going to enter BB6. Give the system a minute to load. So this is just indicating that there are no historical results available on my patient. Essentially, this is where everything comes together. We're typing the patient blood type and testing to ensure that product and patient blood types are compatible. Note that the results associated to any of our blood bank specific test types will file to the blood bank historical record for this patient. We will first result our profile. This is going to be very similar to the unit retype we just performed. However, I happen to know in this example that there is no blood bank calculation associated with the particular blood type test associated to this type profile. So we'll have to manually enter the type, and we'll be prompted with a confirmation that the blood type could not be calculated, which I'll display now. So there we see there's no blood type filing to our our B type test. So I'm going to manually enter a blood type of O negative and final verify. Again, we get that confirmation screen, blood type O negative could not calculate, and we're just asked to confirm. All right, so now we're going to result our ABS type test, which is an antibody screen. This test type has a hard-coded interpretation field, which we'll note when we view the blood bank test dictionary is not listed as one of the component tests. To actually enter into this prompt, we have to enter down and result the component test. And then we can enter into our interpretation prompt. If required tests are associated to this test, on page 6 of the blood bank test dictionary, we will not be able to result the overall interpretation until the required tests have results defined. Once resulted, the overall interpretation will file up to the AB screen prompt under the type, which I'll show now. So we see that overall interpretation has filed up to our AB screen prompt. Note that when we review the blood bank test dictionary for this ABS type test, you do have the ability to reflex an order screen if the antibody screen interpretation is either positive or negative, and that's going to be based off our reflex if ABS positive or ABS negative prompts on page 6 of the blood bank test dictionary. Typically, if the ABS is resulted as positive, an ABID or antibody identification can be reflexed. In this case, we've ordered an ABID on the requisition to display the hard-coded functionality of that test type, so we're going to result the ABS as negative. So next we have our ABID, or antibody identification, which is an AB test type. Here you have a lookup to our antibody dictionary, and we can select an antibody from the lookup. The antibody name will then default in based on what's been defined in the antibody dictionary. Any antibodies identified when resulting the ABID will file to the BBK historical record. And if we were to identify and file an antibody on our patient, the patient header will add AB in the HX region of the header to alert users that an antibody has been associated to the patient once the results are filed. I'm going to remove that association, and we'll move along to the AGID, or antigen identification, or AG type test. Again, any antigens identified when resulting in the AGID will file to the BBK historical record. The system provides a lookup to the antigen dictionary, as it did with the ABID, and we have a list of any of the antigens that are built there. So I'll select one. We can then dictate whether the patient is positive or negative for the identified antigen, along with the result of the testing. So I could indicate positive here. The result prompt is not required, and that's due to the AG res code required prompt being set to no on page 5 of the BBK test dictionary for the AG type. And again, we'll review that later. If a lot number was associated to the reagent used for performing this AGID, users could associate it in the lot prompt, and this is again used for recalling and identification purposes. And if we were to identify an antigen on our patient, the patient header will add AG in the HX prompt to alert users that an antigen has been associated to the patient once the results are filed. So I'm going to remove this. Next, we're going to result our XMIS test or X-type test. In order to result this particular test type, units must be at a ready or available status in order to be cross-matched. Electronic cross-match is not going to be configured in the system, as we'll see in a couple of moments. However, I do have a few KBs, just in case anyone's wondering, on how to enable and set up electronic cross-match. So KB 28925 will provide an overview of all the setup needed to configure electronic cross-match. And then KB number 39303 will discuss electronic cross-match warning messages and what they mean. So I'm going to enter down, and then we're going to identify our red blood cells that we're going to associate to our patient. Once we associate our unit number, we get this BBK unit confirmation, and this is essentially everything that we identified in BBK unit entry. So we see our product number, what that product was, the blood type, when this unit is going to expire, what status it's currently at, where it came from, the source, the volume of the unit, when and what date it was received, that it was inspected, and then if we had any antigens, antibodies, markers, or comments associated. So I'm getting a confirmation screen here that the patient has no verified antibody screen within 72 hours. I could have avoided this had I final verified my ABS, which I had resulted as negative, but since I did not, I'm just getting this confirmation, and we will review this particular confirmation screen when we get into the antibody dictionary. So I'm going to continue, and then I'm asked for an override reason, and I'm going to indicate demo as I'm demoing this functionality to all of you. And then here we get the error that I mentioned, that electronic cross-match is not available for this particular site. So I'm going to result the components of my X-type test. And then we have our compatible prompt. So this is a hard-coded field that accepts 4 responses. If I do an F9, you can see what those responses are: Y, N, P, or L. Y indicates yes, the product is compatible. It's completely compatible. N indicates no, the product is not compatible. P indicates presumed compatible. That's typically used for autologous transfusion, so patients' own blood, or transfusing a unit in an emergency situation where the patient has the same blood type, but no known antibodies. And then L will stand for least incompatible. In an emergency situation involving a patient with multiple antibodies and several cross-match attempts that revealed no completely compatible blood bank unit, you can then enter a result as least incompatible for the BBK units with the weakest cross-reaction to the patient's blood. So I'm going to indicate Y, that this unit is completely compatible for my patient. And in the reference prompt, we see comp or compatible has a Y associated. I will then save and verify all the results. We'll give the system a minute to finish filing those results. All right. So at this point, the patient has units that are designated for them. We can now proceed to the issue routine within the BBK unit desktop. Going to X out of the specimen desktop. I believe I had the unit desktop open. It did. And we're going to go to issue and issue units by patient. In the patient prompt, I'm going to identify my patient's account number. get a confirmation screen. I'm confirming that I'm pulling my patient in to issue a particular unit. Here we can see the units that have been cross-matched or are assigned. So I see the unit that was just cross-matched to my patient. It indicates when the unit was indicated as cross-match compatible and how many hours ago, as well as the product, the blood type, when it expires, and the volume. So I can do a lookup in the unit prompt to see that unit once more. I will select it. In the inspection field, this may be required dependent on the BBK product dictionary page 1, require visual inspection prompt. I'm going to indicate yes, that the product's been inspected. Then we have our issue date and time, whom has issued this unit. In the messenger prompt field, you can enter a mnemonic for a person who transported the unit. This provides a lookup to the MIS person dictionary, but I believe you also have the ability to free text. In the issue location prompt, the system defaults to the patient's current temporary location, but you could also change this prompt to reflect the patient's location when the unit is issued if that location differs. In the workload function prompt, we can assign workload for issuing this unit if you're one of our Canadian hospitals. In the card printer prompt, we can identify a printer to use to print the issue or transfusion card. This card is printed automatically when the unit is issued. And if we were to do a lookup, it would give us a lookup to the LAS client location dictionary. In the card form prompt, we can identify the issue card for which the user would like to print. And in the unit location prompt, we can identify a unit location to assign. Lastly, we can associate any issue comments necessary if need be. So we'll proceed to save and issue this unit. We get a confirmation at the bottom that the system is issuing our unit, what that unit number is, and what the product associated is. We're also evaluating an issue charge, which is coming from the product dictionary, which we'll review later. And our issue charge has a message associated in the order group dictionary, which is just displaying to us that an issue charge has been added. All right, so now we can proceed to transfuse this unit to our patient using the Transfuse tab. And I'm going to do transfusion by patient. We'll pull in my patient account number. We get our confirmation screen, which we've seen a number of times now. And then we're going to do a lookup to our issued and transfused units. I'm going to pull in the unit that we have just issued, and then identify the date the transfusion began as well as the time, the user that's performing the transfusion, and when the transfusion is set to end. And then the end user, who's going to be the person that completed the transfusion. Volume is going to default in from the usual volume prompt or whatever was entered into inventory. And we can then assign a workload function associated to transfusing this unit if you'd like to credit anyone with that particular workload. We can then associate any transfused comments if need be. And there is a custom defined screen at the bottom of this particular screen that is linked to the Transfuse custom defined screen on page 1 of the LAS BBK custom defined parameters. That screen is bbk.trans. So I'm going to click save. And we see that the system is transfusing our unit, the unit number, and the product again. And let's quickly pull a print specimens internal inquiry just to display what will be recorded. So I've identified the specimen that I'm looking to review, and we're going to preview. And here we see the ordered products, the ordered tests, and the product that we had issued and transfused to the patient is identified. We see the unit number, the volume, the blood type, when the transfusion began and ended, the status of the product, as well as the date and time of issue, and all the results associated to the results we entered when we were in enter edit results. All right. Let's see, what time is it? Let's go ahead and take maybe a 2-minute break, and then we'll proceed into the blood bank source and destination dictionary. This would be a great time if you had any questions with regard to the overview of workflow you just saw. You can enter that into the Q&A section, and we will respond to those comments. All right. So moving on, we're going to review the blood bank source and destination dictionary. The source and destination dictionary should contain all possible sources from which your blood bank receives products and all destinations to which your products are shipped. Sources are linked to units via the enter, edit, inventory units routine, as we saw. And when units are entered into inventory, you must, you must specify an originating source for each unit. In the example we used when we went through our overview, we used the American Red Cross. The source category is also a sorting parameter for inventory reports. The source category allows you to sort the inventory by originating source. Sources, again, are linked to units via the enter, edit, inventory units routine. And yes. So we're going to review the example ARC, or the American Red Cross. To exit here. Go back. And we're going to go ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, BBK, source destination, enter edit. I'm going to X out the parameters also. All right, and I'm going to enter in our ARC, or American Red Cross mnemonic. The active field, I'm sure you've seen many times now. If you want this particular mnemonic to appear as an eligible response in the lookup, you'd indicate Y for yes, otherwise no. In the type prompt, we have three options: source, destination, or both. A source, you'd identify source if you have a location for which your blood bank receives products. For example, a donor room. And a destination would be a location your blood bank ships products to. For example, the Center for Diagnostic Products. Both is a location your blood bank both ships and receives products from. So in this case, American Red Cross is set to both. In our name prompt, you'd enter an appropriate description of the source or destination using up to 30 characters of free text. The source or destination name appears in dictionary lookup. In the abbreviation prompt, you'd enter the abbreviation for this source or destination. The automatic default is going to be the first 15 characters from the entry in your name field directly above. In the address, city, state, and zip code prompts, you'd enter the source and destination street address for mailing purposes, such as sending recruitment or thank you letters. In the phone prompt, you can enter the source or destination's phone number for recruitment and contact purposes. In the email address prompt, you can enter the electronic mail address where messages can be sent. Then we have our label note prompt. You can use this field for only the .unitb standard label format. You can enter free text specifying the source label note. The source label note appears centered below the address of the source section of the printed label. In the registration number prompt, you can enter the registration number of the source. The source can be up to 10, this number can be up to 10 digits in length. And the number prints on ISBT 128 labels, along with the source's name, address, and license number. In the license number prompt, you just enter the license number for this source. In the affiliated prompt, this is a yes or no field, and we can indicate whether this source or destination is affiliated with the blood bank. For example, the donor room is affiliated with the blood bank typically. A blood center such as the American Red Cross is typically not affiliated. So tests run on incoming units usually indicate whether a source is affiliated or not. The affiliated default ISBT unit numbers prompt is a yes or no field. If you want to print ISBT 128 barcode labels for this affiliated source, you'd enter yes, otherwise no. If you enter a responsive yes at this field, the following occurs after you enter unit from the source. First, ISBT appears as the default in the BBK unit number field of the enter inventory units routine or the pool units routine. You can delete this entry and then enter the unit number or scan the barcode. And second, you can leave the unit number as ISBT after you file the entry. The system generates a new ISBT 128 compliant unit number based on the sources.isbt barcode, the collection year, or the incremented sequence number. And this prompt is only available if affiliated as SETDS. In the non-ISBT unit number manual entry prompts, we have our unit number length field, where you can enter the number of characters that correspond to the region length portion of the BBK unit number. The maximum length for a region is 3 characters. And this field works in conjunction with manual entry, unit number, unit length field to determine the correct unit number format. The system will check that value if a user manually enters a unit into inventory. And then in the region length prompt, many units received from non-affiliated sources have a special region code associated with the source. This entry is not part of the usual barcode. So this field allows you to define the region and prefix. We'll move on to page 2. In the ISBT label facility names 1 and 2, you can enter the FDA registered facility name to print on ISBT 128 labels. The 2 fields, which are 50 and 49 characters long, allow you to enter the full FDA registered name on ISBT 128 labels. In the symbologies prompts, you can enter the barcode symbology or the language for the barcode used to identify this blood type. You can select the symbology compatible with your barcode reader firmware, and it provides a lookup to the barcode symbology dictionary. In the barcode field, you'd enter the corresponding barcode number for the source or destination for each symbology. It is a unique identifier for the source, so you know the source of the product. Region length and default region have the same functionality as on page 1. Then in the contact name prompt, you could enter the contact name for this group. The screens will scroll to accept as many entries as necessary. This would be used perhaps if you have an expired unit you need to send back to a particular source or destination, but you would need to contact them first, and to do so you'd view these fields. In the title prompt, you'd enter your contact's title. Multiple entries can be entered. Similarly, you can enter their telephone number and email address. Multiple entries can be entered in all fields, and they allow for free text. In the syntax check rule prompt, this entry, which is defined in the LAS Rules Dictionary, allows you to accept or to check acceptable number formats. For instance, a format of 2 letters followed by 5 numbers may be acceptable for one source, but another source may require 2 letters and 7 numbers. Meditech will assist you in designing syntax rules. The fields will only look up to rules built as BB unit number in the Data Fields From tab within the LAS Rules Dictionary. And lastly, we have our LAS site prompt. So you would enter, or if a lab site utilizes an alternate mnemonic for the source or destination, you could indicate it there. So now we're going to move on to the BBK Antigen Dictionary. I'll pause for just a moment to allow any questions to come through the Q&A section, should there be any questions with regard to the source and destination dictionary. But again, we'll just do a quick pause. All right, so we're going to move right along into the antigen dictionary. The antigen dictionary is where we define all antigens that can be identified on a patient, unit, or donor. Entries built within this dictionary provide the result lookup for BBK-AG test type. When an antigen is identified on a patient, unit, or donor, the positive/negative interpretation files to the BBK history, linking to an associated antibody identified in the BBK antibody dictionary to facilitate incompatibility checking and unit searches. So we're going to move into the antigen dictionary. Pathway will be ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, BBK, antigen, enter edit. We'll pull in the K antigen. In the mnemonic prompt, this is a free text field. You can enter the antigen mnemonic that will be used in enter edit BBK results when resulting in AG type test. We ask that all mnemonics be built in uppercase letters for consistency and to prevent users from having to use the shift key when entering results. In the active prompt, if you want this antigen to display in the lookups, you would want to indicate active yes, otherwise no. In the name prompt, which is a free text field, you'd enter a name descriptive of the entry. This name will appear in lookups and on reports to further define the antigen mnemonic entry. In the abbreviation prompt, again, free text, you'd enter an abbreviation for this entry that will appear on patient and management reports with the positive or negative result. In the group prompt, also free text, this field was previously used to build cell panels in Meditech and can be used in NPR reports. However, this functionality is no longer supported within the 6X platform. It was a self-contained dictionary, meaning that if the group did not exist, you could free text in the field, and when the dictionary entry was filed, the entry would be added into the lookup for future use. In the ISBT 128 antigen prompt, this is a lookup to QIV antigen codes defined by Meditech. You can enter the ISBT 128 antigen code associated with this antigen, and the system will use this value when scanning and printing ISBT 128 format unit labels. And then again, we have our LAS site prompts. These provide a lookup to the LAS lab site dictionary. And if you had a lab site that had a different mnemonic for the K antigen, we could associate that mnemonic with our LAS site. That completes the dictionary prompts within the antigen dictionary. So we'll move along to the antibody dictionary. The antibody dictionary is where we define all antibodies that can be identified on a patient, unit, or donor. Entries built within this dictionary provide the result lookup for BBK-AB test types. When an antibody is identified on a patient, unit, or donor, the positive or negative interpretation files to the BBK history, linking to an associated antigen identified in the BBK antigen dictionary, which we just saw, to facilitate incompatibility checking and unit searches. We'll move back into Meditech, and this will follow the same pathway directly above antigen. We'll pull in K for the anti-K antibody. In the mnemonic prompt, which is a free text field, you'd enter the antibody mnemonic that will be used in enter edit BBK results when resulting in AB type test. We ask again that all mnemonics be built in uppercase letters for consistency. Lowercase antibodies should be built with the preceding L to indicate lowercase. If you want this particular antibody to appear as an eligible response in lookups, you'd indicate Y in the active prompt, otherwise no. In the name prompt, which is a free text field, you can enter a name descriptive of the entry. This name will appear in lookups and on reports to further define the antibody mnemonic entry. In the abbreviation prompt, you can enter an abbreviation for this entry that will appear on patient and management reports, along with the positive or negative interpretation. And that, again, is a free text prompt. In the autoantibody prompt, this is a yes or no field, and you can define both regular alloantibodies and autoantibodies in this dictionary. In order to mark this antibody as an autoantibody, you'd enter yes. If it is not an autoantibody, you'd enter no. Associated antigen. This prompt gives you a lookup to the BBK antigen dictionary, and you can enter the antigen that corresponds to the identified antibody. When units are searched for cross matches, units that have associated antigens will not appear as a unit to be selected for cross match. And this prompt works in conjunction with the warn if incompatible prompt directly below it. This is a yes or no prompt. When cross-matching or issuing a unit, the system determines if the unit has been tested for the patient antibody's associated antigen. If you enter Y at this prompt, you would have the system generate a warning if the unit has not been tested for the corresponding antigen. This message will display in result entry, and when issuing a unit to a patient. The warning can be overridden, but it will be logged in the BBK override warning report, along with the reason for the override. In the clinically significant prompt, this is a yes or no field. In order to perform an electronic cross-match, there cannot be any clinically significant antibodies present. If the user answers this prompt as Y, the antibody is considered clinically significant and will prevent electronic cross-match from invoking. And then lastly, we have our LAS site prompts. So if you have a lab site that would like to map a different mnemonic for this particular antibody, they could do so within those prompts. So now we're going to move into the BBK blood type dictionary. The blood type dictionary is where we define all the blood types that can be identified on a patient, unit, or donor. Entries built within this dictionary provide the result lookup for B-type tests. When filed, blood types will file to the patient, unit, or donor BBK history. And blood types are calculated through the use of BBK truth tables within the BBK calculation dictionary, as we saw earlier in the presentation. Go back into Meditech, and it's along the same pathway. We'll select blood type, enter edit. And we'll pull in A positive. In the mnemonic field, you'd enter the blood type mnemonic that will be used and enter edit BBK results when resulting a B-type test. Any blood type that could be used on a patient, unit, or donor must be entered into this dictionary. The active prompt, if you want this blood type to appear as an eligible response in the lookups, you'd indicate yes, otherwise no. In the name prompt, you'd enter a name descriptive of the blood type mnemonic. The name will appear in lookups, which will be alphabetically listed to mnemonic, according to mnemonics rather. In the abbreviation prompt, this is a free text field, and you'd enter an abbreviation for this entry that will appear on patient and management reports. This abbreviation should be something descriptive of the blood type. In the transfusible all products prompt, this is a yes or no field. If a unit with this blood type can be transfused to a patient contingent on compatibility, you'd enter yes. If the unit with this blood type cannot be transfused, you'd enter N. This entry will work in conjunction with the transfusible products field. So since transfusible all products is set to yes, the transfusible products field is grayed out. When set to no, this opens the door for the transfusible for products prompt to be entered into. When you identify a product at this field, units of this product go to an available status as soon as the units are entered into inventory. In the allow emergency issue prompt, this is a yes or no field, and the prompt determines which compatibility checks are performed during emergency issue. If the blood type is considered universal and can be issued in an emergency situation, you should enter Y. When entering no, if emergency issue should not be allowed, When there is a blood type mismatch, you should enter no. A warning message is provided when selecting a unit with this blood type during emergency issue. And then if the patient does not have a historical blood type, then any unit can be emergency issued with no warning. The system will check the responses in the restrict if no current blood type and allow blood type mismatch override prompts in the BBK customer defined parameters first before evaluating this field when determining the selection. And Alia will demonstrate or show you those fields later on in the presentation. In the ABO grouped prompt, this is a free text field, and you'd enter the ABO group this blood type belongs to, so A, B, AB, or O. In the RH factor prompt, you can indicate either positive or negative, and you'd want to identify if an RH factor related to this blood type is either positive or negative. In the screen label prompt, this is a free text field, and you'd enter the screen label that will display this blood type on screens in the donor, inventory, and requisition routines. In the symbology prompt, this is a lookup to Meditech's hard-coded symbologies, CODABAR, Code 39, Code 128, and ISBT 128. You'd enter the barcode symbology used to identify this blood type when reading in or printing blood bank unit labels. In the print barcode prompt associated right next to symbology, this is a free text prompt, and if your healthcare organization would like to print off labels for your units, you'd enter the barcode number that represents this blood type, and that symbology will print on the label. In the barcodes prompt, this is free text numeric. If your blood type or your blood bank uses a barcode reader or scanner to read barcode labels on units of blood, you'd enter the corresponding barcode number for this particular blood type, and you'd enter the number that identifies the blood type entered. You can only enter one number per type for each symbology. So we'll move right along to page 2. The next prompts determine product compatibility for each patient blood type. If the blood type and product or product group combination is not listed here, only products with the same blood type as the patient can be cross-matched, assigned, issued, or transfused. So the mnemonic and name pull over from page 1, and you want to consider the mnemonic at the top, the patient blood type. So in the compatible blood types prompt, this is a lookup to the BBK blood type dictionary, and you'd enter other blood types that are compatible with the blood type listed in the mnemonic field. The field will only be available if the transfusible all products field on page 1 is set to yes. In the for products prompt, this is a lookup to the BBK product dictionary. For the blood type entered, which is highlighted at the top, you'd list all the products compatible with the patient blood type listed in the mnemonic field at the top of the screen. Typically, it's more efficient to use the for product group fields to define compatibility. Meditech recommends users only define individual products if all products in the group are not compatible or the product does not belong to a product group. In the for product groups field, this is a lookup to the BBK product group dictionary. For the blood type entered, list all product groups compatible with the patient blood type listed in the mnemonic field at the top of the screen. And then we have our LAS site prompts. These are, again, just reserved for interoperability mapping. If a lab site of yours has a different mnemonic for the A positive blood type, you could associate it here. All right. So we can take another maybe 1-minute break, allow some opportunity for questions to come in through the Q&A, and then we'll proceed along to the BBK department and test dictionary. All right, so we're going to proceed right along to the BBK Department Dictionary. The blood bank module must be organized into departments. Each test and product in the blood bank is assigned to a blood bank department. Therefore, departments that process specimens, record, and report test results must have prefixes. And prefixes are part of a numbering system within blood bank that identify the department with which specimens are associated. Thus, this is why we use the Blood Bank Department Dictionary to define all departments used within the blood bank module. I'm going to go back into Meditech. I'm going to select department, which is following the same pathways we've been utilizing the past few dictionaries. And I'm going to pull in BBK. In the mnemonic field, you'd enter a unique mnemonic to identify the department entry a user wants to create if they're choosing to create a new entry, or you can identify an existing mnemonic, as I've done. In the active prompt, if you want this entry to appear as an eligible response in lookups that correlate to BBK department, such as within the product dictionary, test dictionary, you'd want to enter yes here. If no is entered, this department will not appear in the lookups. In the name prompt, you'd enter a name descriptive of the entry. This name can appear in lookups and on reports to further define the department dictionary entry. In the abbreviation prompt, when creating a new BBK department, the first 5 characters of the department name will default into this field. To define your own abbreviation, you can default out that or delete out that default response and enter up to 5 characters of free text, and users can use upper or lowercase letters. In the prefix prompt, we associate a prefix to the department, which is going to set up the daily specimen numbering wheel. Each department may have a unique prefix, share a prefix with another department, or have no prefix. For example, a blood bank charge department can be assigned for charge-only tests, which would not require a prefix. It's important to note that tests assigned to a specimen are assigned to a specimen based on prefix, not department. In this field, users can enter 1 or 2 letters to define the specimen numbering wheel, or leave the fields blank if the department should not create a specimen number for the ordered test. To protect the integrity of the system database after department entry is filed and the expunge feature has been disabled, the department prefixes cannot be changed. That completes the department dictionary. So we'll move along into the test dictionary. All right, so the blood bank test dictionary includes 9 pages of screens. The test type that a user enters on page 1 determines the type of screens that appear on the pages thereafter. Users familiar with the lab test dictionary will easily adjust to the BBK test dictionary, as the dictionaries have a nearly identical build, and that typically makes the addition of the blood bank module fairly seamless. There are 4 lab-specific test types and 5 blood bank-specific test types that we're going to go over. Since the prompts within the blood bank test dictionary are fairly identical to the lab test dictionary, we're not going to be re-going over the prompts that kind of carry over from lab. We're going to be reviewing just the basically builds for various BBK-specific test types. So we're going to go back into Meditech. We're going to go Ancillary Laboratory Dictionaries BBK test. And the first test type we're going to review is a T-type test, or a single resolvable test. And I'm going to pull in AA, which stands for anti-A. So important things to consider on page 1. Again, the type is T. Typically, T-type tests within the BBK module are set to orderable no, because they're going to be linked to either a profile or a group type test. On page 2, we can associate any container information that's necessary. Page 3, we can associate any lab sites and charge information that should be associated to the test. On page 4, most T-type tests are non-numeric, and single reportable tests are typically reported set to no. Typically, no EMR ID is associated to T-type tests. However, NA should be put in its place rather than leaving the prompt blank. If there is no order message, non-orderable tests will not appear in lookups, and many users like to auto-result optional tests with NP in the fields here. This is acceptable with the exception of tests included in a blood bank calculation. Auto NPing results can sometimes invoke the BBK truth tables too soon, so you would not want to auto-result anything associated to your blood bank calculation and B-type test. On page 5, this is where we associate our res codes and overall positive or negative interpretations. Remember that positive and negative must be defined for each result code, and this is necessary for any associated blood bank calculations. Category and rank are not commonly used in blood bank. Access to page 6 is going to be dependent on the from, age, sex fields that will pull over if they're defined at the bottom of page 5, which in this case they are not. Result groups are not typically defined for T-type tests, and additionally, users will not have to fill in delta hours for age groups. Page 7, 8, and 9 are going to be grayed out. Or not grayed out, I'm sorry. Page 7, you can associate any particular method with this particular test, which will display in enter edit results. On page 8, you can attach a new method and result group and any additional charge information. And then on page 9, you can indicate any user notes specific to this particular test type. So next we're going to pull in an example of a P-type test. So we'll pull in a type, which we saw when we were requisitioning. This is a cluster of T, B, and P-type tests from the same department. Profile abbreviations will appear on specimen reports within result entry. So important things to note here. Our type is set to P, and orderable is set to yes. Page 2 is going to be the same as the T-type test. Page 3 will be the same as the T-type test. However, if no billing code is defined, the system will look down to the component T-type test. On page 4, Meditech recommends that NA be entered within the EMR ID field for group and profile tests. This will enable the EMR reports to correctly reflect the tests that have not been linked to an EMR ID and should have an EMR ID associated. On page 5, this is where we link our various component tests to a particular profile. The system will use the profile that is identified in the default profile prompt. And as I demonstrated earlier on in the presentation, a B-type test should fall at the very bottom of the type profile. The blood type test will need to have the highest print number, again, due to the functionality of the calculation that's associated to the B-type test, so that the end result falls on this test. Page 6 will be grayed out. Page 7 is not really needed for profile type tests. Page 8 is the same as our T-type test, and again, page 9 is the same as well, but you can associate any user notes, so you should so choose. We'll move into a G-type test, so I'm going to pull in a TS or a typing screen. On page 1, it's important to note that the type is G. It's orderable set to yes. On page 2, this is essentially the same as the T-type test. If the container is not defined here, the system will look to the component tests associated on page 4 in order to find the appropriate containers. On page 3, this is the same as the T-type test. Again, if no billing code is defined, the system is going to look down one level to the component test. On page 4, Meditech recommends that NA be entered within the EMR ID field for group and profile tests. This enables, again, the EMR reports to correctly reflect the tests that have not been linked to an EMR ID that should have an EMR ID associated. On page 5, this is where we link our various component tests to a particular group. The system will use the profile that's listed in the default group prompt. Page 6 will be grayed out. Page 7, 8, and 9 are going to be the same as we saw previously with the T-type test. Next, we're going to pull in an example of a C or charge type test. I'm going to pull in CMV negative charge. Page 1, it's important to note the type is C. It's orderable, set to yes. There is really no need to associate any containers to a charge type test. On page 3, we can identify charge information, bill and code, charge rules, and bill on status as we saw with our other tests. On page 4, we'd recommend you add NA to the EMR ID field, and pages 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be grayed out. Page 9 will be open for any user notes. So now we're going to get into some of our BBK specific test types. So I'm first going to pull in a BT or blood type test. We can note that the type is B and it's orderable set to no, and that's because this test is typically a component of a profile. So it should not be ordered on its own. On page 2, this is going to be the same as a T-type test. Page 3 will also be the same as a T-type test. On page 4, it's important to note that an EMR ID should be defined and reportable should be set to no, or yes, not no. On page 5, we have a new field specific to our B-type test, and that's the B-type test required test prompt. This means that before the calculation can invoke for the B-type test, the required test listed within this prompt will need to be resulted in order for the calculation to fall on the B-type test. If an interpretation is entered without entering all the required tests, an error message would appear during result entry stating which tests are required and that they need to be resulted. And to know when you result a B-type test, the related or associated data that you enter will file to the patient unit or donor BBK history. Page 6 will be grayed out. Page 7, 8, and 9 will be the same as our T-type test. So we'll next review an ABID, or an antibody identification. This is an example of an AB type, and it should be orderable set to yes. However, typically an ABID reflexes off a positive ABS type test, which we kind of discussed when we went into the overview demonstration. Page 2 will be the same as the T-type test, as will page 3. On page 4, reportable should be set to yes, and an EMR ID should be associated. Page 5 will appear the same as the B-type test, but there's going to be no usable functionality here for the ABID. Page 6 will be grayed out, and page 7, 8, and 9 will have the same functionality we reviewed with the T-type test. Next, we're going to review an AGID. Results of this test type are going to be a lookup to the antigen dictionary. This type of test allows the user to enter multiple antigens tested with a positive or negative value. And the antigen entered for this test will file to the patient unit, donor, or BBK history. On page 1, it's important to know the type is AG. It's orderable set to yes. Page 2 and page 3 will be the same as T-type test. On page 4, an AGID should be reportable set to yes, and it should have an EMR ID associated. On page 5, this is where we define the result code, result text, and positive or negative interpretation for our AG type test. Again, remember that positive and negative must be defined for each result code. That's necessary for any associated blood bank calculations. So in the res code fields, we define a short code that users can enter to represent the expanded result text that will appear during result entry. In the result text field, you'd enter the text that you want to print as the text result on internal reports and inquiries. For example, suppose you enter a result code of N or O, you could then enter the result text of negative. On reports and inquiries, negative will appear as the result. In the P/N prompt, to indicate that the associated result is positive, you'd enter P. To indicate that the result is negative, you'd enter N. For example, 1, 2, and 3 and pause are positive results, and negative, 0, neg are typically negative results. In the AG res code required prompt, you'd enter yes to require a result code when an antigen is required in result entry. If N is entered, this prompt can be skipped. Since this prompt is blank, again, res code was not required when we were in result entry. However, if it was set to yes here, I would have been required to put in a res code. Page 6 will be grayed out, and page 7, 8, and 9 will be the same as our T-type test. We're next going to review an ABS, or antibody screen. This is an example of an ABS type. Results are hard-coded to a positive or negative interpretation with this test type. And results of this test will file to the patient's historical record. This test, again, has the hard-coded interpretation screen of positive or negative that will present and enter edit results. So antibody screen should be set to orderable yes. Page 2 will be the same as the T-type test. Page 3 will be the same as the T-type test. On page 4, the ABS type test should be set to reportable yes, and it should have an EMR ID associated. On page 5, we define the various component tests to our particular profile. The system will use the profile that's defined in the default profile field. On page 6, we have a few new prompts. So the first is going to be the reflex of ABS positive. And here you'd enter the mnemonic for the order group of tests you want the system to check if your overall interpretation is resulted as positive. This is a lookup to the order group dictionary. You can also reflex on an order group if the ABS or the overall interpretation of the ABS is resulted as negative, and that will also provide a lookup to the order group dictionary. And then we have our required test prompt. So antibody screens are set up with component tests similar to a profile. When all the components are defined, we can define which components are required to be completed by placing them at the required test prompt here. Tests that are not always performed should not be entered here, but these tests must be resulted before the interpretation can be entered. And pages 7, 8, and 9 will be just as we've seen them before. So the last blood bank specific test type we're going to review is an X-type test. So I'm going to pull in an XMIS, or immediate spin cross-match. Cross-match results are hard-coded for the 4 values we saw in result entry. Those are Y, N, P, or L. Y stands for yes, N stands for no, P stands for presumed compatible, and L stands for least incompatible. On page 1, the type is an X-type test, and it should be orderable set to yes. Page 2 and 3 will be the same as we've seen with our T-type test. On page 4, reportable should be set to yes, and an EMR ID should be associated. On page 5, this is where we define the various component tests to our particular profile. The system will use the profile that's defined in the default profile prompt. as we've seen previously. On page 6, we have our required test prompt, where we can indicate which components of the cross-match are required to be completed before the results within the before we can result the compatible fields within result entry. And then we also have a few new prompts to the right of that prompt. So the first is going to be order cross-match if not compatible. Your options within this field are going to be auto and ask. So you'd enter auto to automatically order another XM test if the current cross-match is made not compatible. And ask, you'd enter ask to present the user with the question, asking them if they wish to order a new XM test if the cross-match is made not compatible. Order cross-match test. Here you can identify which X-type test should be ordered if the initial cross-match test was made not compatible. And that's going to be a lookup to our X-type test defined within the BBK test dictionary. In the reorder cross-match test if made NA prompt, this presents users with a lookup again to all X-type tests. You can choose a cross-match test to reorder if the current cross-match is made unavailable due to it being issued to another patient. Typically, this should be done at no additional cost to the patient. Other examples for when this kind of comes into play would be if the product expired, or again, if the product was transferred to another patient. And we have a lookup to X-type test. Then we have our order cross-match for change account prompt. This is a new enhancement. And if you want to use another BBK test to record the cross-match information on a new specimen created by the change product order account routine, you'd select the BBK test to use at this field. For example, you may use this field to enter an X-type test for patients who have pre-surgery blood bank work before they register on the day of surgery. And the lookup provides all active X-type BBK tests. I believe this enhancement came about with LIT 1707. There are quite a few other LITs associated to this. So if anyone would like information related to that enhancement, please just let us know, and we can provide the associated link. Then lastly, we have our ignore from XM or transfusion statistics prompt. This is a yes or no prompt. If set to yes, the system will exclude the X test listed above from the cross-match or transfusion report statistics. If N is set, the entry above will be included in any compiled statistics. Pages 7 and 8 will be the same as our T-type test. And then on page 9, we have a few other fields specific to electronic cross-match. We have our EXM charge prompt, where you can enter a charge in dollars for this electronic cross-match test. In the EXM billing code prompt, you can enter the appropriate barcode. In the EXM charge rule prompt, you can enter the appropriate charge rule. In the EXM alt code prompt, you can enter the appropriate CPT code. And in the EXM alt code type prompt, you can enter the appropriate CPT code type. So that is going to conclude part 1 of today's online seminar with regard to the BBK module. We'll break now, give you a few minutes to either unwind or send us questions via the Q&A portion of Zoom. And please feel free to email me at jbrooke@meditech.com with any questions regarding part 1 of today's presentation. If you have maybe a longer question than something you'd like to enter into the Q&A.